He said, look, technology is always going to change.
Hmm.
Your jobs are never going to be secure. You have to stay on the frontier of learning.
I've heard your quote about this fact of reframing decisions.
Well, I'm a big fan of reframing things in general. I sometimes say, oh, I need to take a vacation, but I can't because everybody needs too much from me. And what
Exactly.
helps me a lot is to reframe it into, oh, when I take a vacation, my team is better for it.
You kind of think about or try to encounter the fear, embarrassment part. Talk to us more about that and where's helped you.
Acknowledge that, okay, I
Hmm.
am going to be a little more fear driven, fear motivated. At least it's going to be like a real part of my decision making. Because it's not just like making a decision that has fears. The absence of making a decision also comes with its own fears. What would I do to prevent it from happening? And what would I do to mitigate it if it actually happened?
So whatever worked as a context for being right versus being curious, I absolutely see it happening at what we're facing with AI right now is the only answer to all of this is to be curious.
So I think it's like a human nature thing to want to be right because it's hard to learn when you already believe you're right. You have to know that you're wrong a lot of the time. Otherwise, you have no motivation.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations. The space where creators, founders, and builders look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. If you're wondering about all that's happening in the product space, you've probably worked across a bunch of other domains, picked up skills from a variety of roles in your former stints, and then perhaps landed in product management. Even with the advent and intersection of AI and tech, there's so much of intersectional thinking that is standing out, and this is the most profitable time to build and ship impactful products. I'm excited about today's episode because it's going to be similar to turning the pages of someone's journal. It's going to be breezy. We're going to have inspiring stories and conventional thoughts in product building and fun times of stepping up higher and showing up with so many different avenues. We're talking to Ami Vora, one of my favorite product persons, who's super versatile and she embodies liberal thinking. Ami is a product leader, formerly the chief product officer of Faire. And prior to that, she spent over 15 years at Meta as the VP of product and design for WhatsApp, the VP of product for Facebook's ad system, and also a director at Instagram. She began her career at Microsoft working on the developer tools, and she's cross sectionally worked across a bunch of roles in product, marketing, policy, comms, and even a VC fund. I mean, like, come on, Ami's done it a lot. Hey, Ami, thank you so much for joining here. I'm a super fangirl of yours. I'm so happy we finally get a chat.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you. Thanks, Aishwarya, for having me. It's such a pleasure.
For sure. I mean, why don't we start with your jokes? Everybody knows. And I think I'm really waiting for the joke book, but why don't you kick us off with the episodes at the start?
All right, sure. I do love jokes. I think the people around me love them less, but it's worth it. It's for me. Let's see. Where's one of my favorite jokes right now?
Okay.
Perfectionist walks into a bar.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, someone set the bar too low.
Done. I see.
My favorite kind of jokes are the ones where at the end you have to say, "Get it?" Yeah.
I think you're supposed to laugh now. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
lovely.
You people as funny part.
Oh, no, not at all. It keeps the mood very light, right? So it's definitely like a great icebreaker. I mean, you don't have to go look out for an actual way to start a conversation. You've always like got a bunch of them in your kitty. You're like, okay, you know what? Let me just throw some of my jokes. Let's just get started. So it's
There's one year at work that was really hard. You know, a lot of
uh-huh.
been hard, but there was one year that was really hard, and
Right.
I decided that I was just going to post a joke to my profile every week. So every Friday,
Right.
I just posted a joke. It was the joke of the week to the whole company, like it was the whole company. And I was also writing. I was writing a bunch. I write this public newsletter now, but I originally wrote that internally, and I would sometimes be surprised that I was pouring my heart into all of these newsletter writings about all this hard stuff about how to deal with, tricky
I know.
situations you had in your career and all this stuff that I thought was really hard. And often my jokes would get more likes and comments and engagement, and I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't get through that. People want to, even when things are tough, it's even more important to like
Yeah.
inside have a little bit of lightheartedness.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it also is the most empathetic way that you connect with someone because they really see your authenticity with what really stands for who you are. So I think, and I've been a reader of all of your posts, the hard parts of growth on Substack. So I can really see how the pouring your soul into writing a very serious topic is also something that can really connect with people at the same time, something that just is so lighthearted, but still like
Yes.
so you can also people get
Podcast.
this side of you. Yeah, yeah. That's a good start for our show, I believe. So I really want to get off with this concept, which I think you're the perfect person who embodies that because I've grown up listening to this whole concept of, oh, liberal thinking is great, but often folks who are on the part of liberal thinking gets branded as dilettantes because they're like, oh yeah, you're an amateur, or you dab a couple of things. But I've seen that in your case, Ami. You've literally turned that label into a superpower. I say this with a lot of respect, right? Because there's only like living up to something and actually like really trying to show up and believe in that and then keep growing at it. So when did you first realize that breaking rules rather than fitting into them was actually your competitive edge?
Ah, you're very kind. I mean, I would love to say that I had a plan and I had all these major realizations that I knew how to go about my life and
Mm.
doing what I needed to do. But that's really not true. I'm not a person with a plan. And I felt like I was surrounded by people who knew from the very beginning. I think they woke up as 5-year-olds and were like, I'm gonna run an e-commerce company. I feel like they had that knowledge and strength and a sense of like purpose from the beginning. And I've kind of never been like that. I'm excited by lots of things. I like to write, I like to read, I like logic, I like computers, I like there's so many things in the world that I think are really interesting. And especially earlier in my career, I feel like I watched people who knew what they wanted, they would specialize, and then they would just rise really fast. They would get promoted because they knew the domain, they knew the people, they were expert, they would continue just being successful. And I kind of couldn't do that. I would get bored very quickly. For me, especially at that point in my life, the interesting part of the problem was like when you were in peak learning mode, when everything was new, everything was a mess. And then as soon as it got a little more straightforward, I was like, okay, time for me to move on and think. So I felt like I just didn't gain very much ground. And I tried to force myself to like stay in one place. But really what happened was I kind of realized I couldn't. Like the only thing I could at that point in my career was to move around, was to learn more, even if it meant I was making this career trade-off. And so it wasn't like I had a plan of like, let me collect all these different tools and experiences. At that point in my life, it was the only thing that I could do to stay engaged and valuable and excited. And then in retrospect, it helped me a lot. But, I think all people who had a purpose and knew what they were doing, they're doing great. And this is what happened to work for me, where I think one of my strengths is just being able to like connect a bunch of dots, pattern match. Like I kind of have a different set of tools. And I do so. I think it's such an interesting world. Everybody needs tools that work for them. But it wasn't like I decided that. It's more like it was the only way I could manage kind of my energy and my success. And then it happened that it turned out to be useful for me.
And I'm glad you mentioned energy because that's one thing that I've seen from your journey. Like after reading about how you've crossed different paths and also listening to you across multiple other avenues, right? I feel like a lot of this recession comes only when you're very cognizant of, oh, like this is what excites me. And this is exactly why I'm driven to go and pick something up. Because I find that especially with product, there's naturally the thing that you have to think in multiple dimensions and you naturally tend to gravitate in multiple directions. But there's also this whole thing about a very linear way of planning things, which I think for a lot of people, even though it doesn't go really well with who they are, it sort of sets a convention and says, oh, you have to be in a certain way to be in a certain role. And I was able to be very relatable with what you've done personally too, because it's the same thing that I went through in my career. And I've seen like a bunch of folks who went through the same thing, but I think it's that that cross-setting level of, you have to agree with the fact that this doesn't work. Like I get super bored very easily. And it's like, oh, you know what? This is boring. Let me just jump from one place to another place. And of course, like I think when you're very conventionally surrounded by folks, it's not easy to kind of go through that and then say, okay, I'm just following this, but then like there are 10 other people around you who keep wondering about why the hell is she doing this? And it's all of this. So actually, for some of those experiences, I feel like it's definitely like setting grounds for a lot of folks to get that self-awareness and the fact that energy is what drives a lot of actions, right? And it's just not about only skills and only, oh, this is how the role is supposed to be. But I think it's a lot of, hey, who you are as a person and what really drives you. I think that's really coming out from what you were just saying from your experiences too.
I think that's really important. And I'm not saying that like it always makes sense to just change jobs every year and a half or flit around. Some of this is also, at least for me, it's also been training myself to find energy in things that I might not immediately. So, some of the jobs I've stuck around much longer and then had to think about, okay, how do I get my energy from making a decision and seeing how it plays out 2 years later? How do I get my energy from investing in people and seeing how they develop, helping them develop for longer portions of their career? There's like all these different things that you can learn from. For me, a lot of my energy is from feeling a sense of learning, feeling that feedback loop of like, okay, I did this thing. Here's how it worked out. Now let me deal about that. Especially as you get more senior, like those feedback loops just become like longer and longer.
Yeah.
Like the decisions you make, you might not see play out for a couple of years. When you're starting on your career, you're in IC, you can like write something or do something, like you can check it off your list and it's done. And you get the feedback loop right away. Like building a team and investing in people, you don't know for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn how to get energy from that.
Yeah.
And from, okay, you know what? I'm not going to get the immediate feedback loop, but I have to be getting energy every time I see something in the right direction, even if it's 18 months down the line.
Yeah. Actually, that was exactly where I was getting at, because the time frame that you mentioned is very important, because for people who are very self-reflective in general, the fact that the impatience also comes into picture, right? Where you're like, let's say you're 2 months, 3 months down in the role, and then you're constantly over engineering or overthinking about, okay, wait, is this even the right direction for me? Is this what I really wanted? So that was exactly what I was getting at. Has there been a time for you, particularly, especially as you moved from being that individual ICPM to PM lead to even a CPO? Was there a time that you really felt, giving it time, it was what is needed? Because easier for us to look back and say, oh, like this is too long or too quick. So what was your practical experience of judging something too quickly or then like giving it time and then realizing this worked out?
Yeah, I mean, the first time I stayed at a job for more, like in a particular role for more than like 18 months was when I moved to Facebook ads at Facebook.
Right.
Really, my entire tenure until that point had been like 9 to 18 months everywhere and then move on as soon as it gets boring. And, it was a rapidly growing company. And so you did just quite a lot. But when I took this job, starting by running one team, my kind of manager just sat me down and was like, hey, we're taking a bet on you. Like, you need to keep showing up. This can't be one of your little, I don't know, dilettante butterfly. Like, we're building a real system here. We're building a real team. We're building a real business. Like, if you're signing up for this, you need to see that. Obviously, things can always go wrong, but like, this is an investment that we're making and you need to return it. Right. And then I had to figure out, okay, how do I really get energy from all of these things that I wasn't used to? How do I think about getting energy from the team I'm building? How do I think about, okay, thinking about the strategy 4 years from now, not just the strategy next month?
Yeah.
How do I think about the seeds I'm going to plant? Like, is there a new strategy? Is there a new technology? Because when you're thinking in, at least at that time, when you're thinking in 9-month stretches, you can't necessarily change a whole lot of infrastructure. You can't necessarily change the fundamental direction of the business. But when you're thinking multiple years out, you can lay the foundation, you can see how and continue building on it. And so there are all these different skills that I got to learn by committing and just saying, okay, like I'm going to do this for at least 2 years and then every year. And that's that kind of idea of not relitigating has been really important to me, of just saying, I don't know. I think like it's so easy to have these moments where you kind of spin and you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, really doing what I care about? Am I passionate enough about this? Am I valued enough? Is there?" And I think those moments are so insidious because they get you to this point in your head where you're exhausted all the
Yeah.
time. And you're like 1 foot in and 1 foot out, and you're not committed to what you're doing today, but you're also not taking an action to do the next thing, so you're just tired all the time and while you're around in circles. And so it's really helpful to me to just say
Mm-hmm.
the plan. I'm just going to say yes for 6 months, for 1 year, for what I'm not going to think about it, and then at the end of 6 months, I'm going to say, okay, am I ready to make a major change? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, then I set the timeline and I do it. And if the answer is no, I just don't think about it anymore. And that kind of commitment device is
Yeah.
self-hack
Yeah.
instead of thinking every day, oh man, it's been 2 years. Is it time for me to go? Is it time for me,
Mm, I see that. Yeah. It's also like mentally setting this boundary and really showing up within that boundaries time, right? Because I guess, like, from what you're explaining to, a lot of this is to show up even when you feel otherwise, because we have always like been taught that, oh, you have to trust your instincts, you have to trust your gut. While this is like such a contrasting thing to handle because in one dimension, you're wired to be this person who actually takes decisions based out of energy. At the same time, on the other dimension, it's not like you wake up today and think, oh, I'm going to go, and then tomorrow you're not going to go. But it's more like you really need to balance that kind of a whim and a very energetical whim with something that's more grounded. So it's fantastic how you put that into the picture, like getting that ground over like a boundary time.
It's also been really helpful mentally to just assume that I'm going to show up the next day. Because like you have a lot I don't know, I'm like somebody who's often driven by like fear and embarrassment and things like that. And I hate being embarrassed in front of people, especially my peers, especially people I respect. But, when you are sure that you have to show up the next day again, people talking to them again, no matter what, it kind of didn't give me as much time to be embarrassed,
Right.
because I didn't have a choice. I was just going to walk and say it again, right? Like I knew
See.
a kind of mental boundary also just helped me control my emotion a little bit, where I wouldn't necessarily spiral into, oh no, like what did I do? What will they think of me? But instead I was like, well, that wasn't great, but I guess I have to see them tomorrow. So like, let's
Yeah, that's
we should dust ourselves up and just keep going.
yeah. It's like controlling your little psyche. I mean, it's just hack, right? Like I totally
Yeah.
get it. And for me, like as we talk about the energy and dealing with your own thinking, especially with a lot of these things into picture, what comes to my mind is also this whole pattern of context switching, right? Because all of this we're talking about is so exhausting, and especially for me, the funny part I've been thinking in the recent times is how much we talk about context switching for AI. Like we say, oh, the model has so much of context window. It has to handle whatever you ask and whatever you dump in. I guess it's the same thing with humans too. And much before how models did, we as humans did that in terms of moving across roles. And as you're like really thinking about your career growth and all of that. For you particularly, how are you seeing this context switch play out from, let's say, times before all of what's happening in tech is currently happening to now where a lot of things are changing? So how's this whole context switching itself has had a change?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the hardest things about like how we live now is how much context switching we have to do. One thing that I think about a lot is how to make sure I'm context switching in, let's say, hours, not days, or if possible, days, not weeks. So when you start your week, you have to do, I don't know, 100 different things across 10 different categories. But how can I try to do those, maybe sequentially so that I'm not context switching? I kind of have this fundamental belief that like humans haven't changed as much as our technology has changed. So like technology changes all the time, but like
Yeah.
our systems as humans and our emotions are like pretty stable. That's what evolution is for, us to kind of buffer stuff. And so we're not necessarily built for like, okay, I can handle 40 things in my head at the same time, right? Like I have a lot of capacity, but I can handle one thing pretty well for an amount of time. And so I think just organizing my calendar and my energy so that I'm not trying to simultaneously write an email and talk to somebody, which I think is the most of us are in most of the day. Like it's very tempting to do that, especially when you're on a video conference with someone. You're like, okay, let me also do. And really, I
Yeah.
find that maybe it feels like you're getting more done, but you're just more tired at the end of the day. And so I just think about expanding that increment
Right.
into, okay, could I spend a whole day just thinking about product stuff? And then could I spend the next whole day just thinking about stuff? And that helps me be more effective. And
Right.
it also, I feel like when you zoom out, I think the temptation for most people is just to try to remember every single thing they've learned from every job and try to apply it to everything. And maybe maybe that works for people. That's not necessarily how my mind works.
Right.
And so I've tried to pull out is just, okay, what's the pattern of this job that I've learned over and over? Okay, how do I bring that into something that's just a tool? And then, I don't need to remember every specific tactic. I don't need to remember every specific example. Just kind of that zooming out. And that's one of the reasons I write is I try to like canonicalize, oh, here's the main thing that I've learned about this sort of problem. Let me
Right.
like pull it out. And then that pattern is the tool to remember, not single piece that I have to like totally keep in mind all the time. Because I don't think my
Yeah.
brain that much context. And I don't, so I'm not gonna pride myself on that. I'm gonna
Yeah.
try to go a lot of stuff and try to pick out the big patterns.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense because I think contradictorily, we're always asked to look for those specific scenarios and keep in mind the kind of stories because that's what you tend to pass on, whether let's say you're appearing for interviews or you're talking to other people. You constantly like, oh, when was the last time I did this? And then there's like a star methodology, and then there's like ways that you can like structure this, pocket this into a story. But like, what you say like really makes sense because what you're really trying to do there is saying how this changed your belief as a person, or like how did this impact you as a person when you were working, and then draw patterns through that. So yeah, this approach I think is more practical than what it takes to write down every single part of what you did. And like I think funnily, this concept of tools that we're talking about. And when I look back from the start of this conversation, there's been like a constant, oh, like Ami has a bunch of tools, or Ami tries to come up with this bunch of patterns, which is like termed as tools. I know for a fact that there are a few quintessential things that I would love to get your takes on. So maybe you can tell me if this is something you pictured yourself as, oh, this is my tool, or what kind of anecdote that you've related to this. But yeah, I'm just going to like, say some scenarios that I've seen you often quote. So I'd love to get your take on it. So, yeah, first one. I've heard you quote about this fact of reframing decisions to consider other people's motivation too. This I particularly remember from being there in person at one of the events where you spoke, where you were talking about it from the angle of vacation and a leave, but then it's pretty much, I think, applicable to any part of product decision, right? So I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, I'm a big fan of reframing things in general, like I think I think I know what you're talking about. You're talking about how I sometimes say, "Oh, I need to take a vacation, but I can't because everybody needs too much for me." And what
Exactly.
helps a lot is to reframe it into, "Oh, when I take a vacation, my team is better for it and my family is better." Like that is I think a really important self-hack because I think we often give ourselves more leeway when we think we're operating on behalf of others than when we do it on behalf of ourselves. There's actually, I read some research not too long ago that also suggests that for women in particular, we are both more effective and more liked when we negotiate on behalf of others than when we negotiate on behalf of ourselves. And I think that's a pretty good self-hack of like, okay, whenever I actually secretly want to do something, I just need to frame it to myself in terms of how it helps other people. And then I'm much more likely to do it. And the same thing is true about, sometimes I would get feedback of like, oh, I need to talk about my accomplishments more. I need to have a higher profile. I need to be more vocal. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's not how I think about who I am. It doesn't feel authentic to me. And so much, but your team needs this. You need to be presenting the work of your team. And suddenly that was a totally different reframe. It's about me helping other people. And so I think having that tool set of just saying, wait a minute, how am I not thinking about it? Sometimes you think, oh, this is a really bad task. I like hate doing it. I have to do it. I don't want anyone else to do it. It's because it's terrible. I just like have to get it done. But you hate it and you procrastinate on it and then you do a bad job at the end. But if you reframe that into, hey, someone around me would love to do this task because it's a step up for them. They're going to learn something else. Then you think about it totally differently and you can think, oh, maybe I can empower some. Like maybe it's good for me and good for them. So I think just having the tool available to always think, well, what would an outsider think
Mhm.
about my reaction to this? What would they think about how this problem is placed in the world? They fundamentally
Mhm.
different. And I find that very liberating to just be able to,
Yeah.
oh, I'm coming at this with a bunch of specific baggage. If an
Yeah.
alien from Mars came in and they saw this, what would they think, you know?
Yeah. And it's sort of very comforting to listen to it as well because, it's sort of like really shifting that pattern from the me to, okay, yeah, this is done for me, but then how does it really help other people? So
It's a
the minute
system.
that, yeah, it's a system, exactly. So, like I said, the minute you put the onus on other people, there's always this thing about, okay, I'm doing something much grander than the whole self centric aspect of, oh, it's just me and it's just for myself. So, that makes sense. Yeah. Cool. The next one being, and I think you also brought it up in our previous conversation, which is, yeah, you kind of think about or try to encounter the fear embarrassment part. So I also
Mhm.
know that you like maintaining a fear list similar to the goal list. Talk to us more about that and where's helped you and how's that toolkit like super handy for you?
Yeah, I borrowed this one actually from Sahil Bloom, who
Hmm.
read
Yeah,
the
I love
newsletter.
his tweets. Yeah.
Yeah. He suggested this exercise called like a fear setting exercise. I think we always try to do like goal setting, and I do,
Exactly.
which there's so many versions of this. Like the one I like to do is also like a year in review version where
Ah,
at the
right.
beginning of the
Yeah.
year you probably think about what letter would I write to myself about what I accomplished.
Hmm.
But I also recognize that like I'm somebody and I've had to get comfortable with this. I'm somebody who has a lot of fears and I'm driven by them. I think it comes, it comes from my family. I think my dad is very similar in lots of ways. And so I can kind of trace it back. And I think for a lot of my career, people would just be like, well, don't have fear, just don't be worried. That's it. And that's like not,
I resonate.
yeah, that's not like actionable advice because that's actually not how my mind works. And
Yeah.
what I found instead was just to like acknowledge that, okay, a little more fear driven, fear motivated. At least it's going to be like a real part of my decision making. And so
Mm.
what I do whenever I'm thinking about something is I just try to like make the decision with that in mind. So I literally write down, wait a minute, what are all my fears? If I'm thinking about taking a new job, what are
Mm.
all my fears about taking that job? And
Mm.
for every fear, what would I do to prevent it from happening? And what would I do to mitigate it if it actually happened?
Right.
Then, what are my
Mm.
fears about not taking the job? Like, let me just paint the whole picture because it's not just like making a decision that has fears. The absence of making a decision also comes with its own fears. And
Mm.
I'm a believer in just like being as explicit as possible about everything because then you can take the air out of these amorphous, usually when you're thinking about taking a job, you just have all these stresses running around.
Oh.
But really, like when you write them down, those stresses lose the same power because then you like know how to attack them. If you're worried, hey, this is a pay cut, how should I feel about that? Well, you can do the math, and then you know the answer. If you think, hey, this is a status cut, then you can think about, wait, do I really care about that? If I care about it,
Wow.
is there a different platform I should be using to make sure I still have a public voice? Like whatever your fears are, the minute you write them down, you can actually tactically attack them and like kind of unknot them instead of just having them be kind of a ball of fear and then you don't know how to react.
Yeah. No, fair enough. And I think the most powerful thing about this is that you first acknowledge the fact that the fear is there instead of like really dodging it away. Because for a lot of times we've heard from people, or generally the best advices that come from people is like, oh, like that's nothing, you just don't have fear and you just have to go
Just
in
don't
it
worry
with
about
it.
it.
Just don't worry about it, as if that like really helps. But then
Yeah.
I think the first step, like you said, is the most practical way of just acknowledging that and then giving it that room and space. Like typically like how a product coach or more so how therapists would do, right? Like first acknowledge the fact this is there and then like navigate that. And it also reminds me of what Shreya Stoshi also keeps saying about whenever you have this anxiety and this fear about doing anything in product, like he talks about it from the fact of, let's say you're just scared of like even coming up with a strategy for your product. First acknowledge that fear, like yeah, like let it rest, and then you deal with it, and you just don't like give it away, and you just don't go that way. So yeah.
It's power. I also think a bunch of these tools are actually tools we use when building products. When you build a product, you think, what are all the things that can go wrong? And you
Mhm.
think, much runway do I give them, right? You say, okay, if
Yeah.
the metric is up by this much, then we roll back the experiment. If we see this kind of behavior, then we curtail like what we're doing. Like we actually
Yeah.
all have these tools that we use every day. We just throw them out the window when we're thinking about ourselves and our emotions, even though we've honed them in this
Yeah.
it's so hard to apply them to this
Yeah.
more space. But I always find a lot of value in that because they're good rules. They're like
Yeah.
well, just tools and skills that I've honed enough. And the more I can apply them, just the more leverage I'll get out of them.
And it's just funny, right? Like how you said it's so possible for the same person to apply this to a product and on the same day not being able to apply this to their own selves and just having trickiness.
It's totally normal because that's just emotions are hard, like
Yeah.
rationality and irrationality.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The last part about this scenario building is you spoke about the closing the loop part. I'd love to get more insights onto that. Like you keep saying how there is no hiding your opinions. At some point in time, you're always like entitled to give that opinion out, especially if you're climbing more senior in your career. So how's this whole closing the loop played a part in your toolkit?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a few ways this shows up. Some of it is sometimes feedback about people around you or feedback that you need about yourself. Sometimes it's feedback about a product or a strategy where it's kind of your job to give an opinion. And I think the hard part is like, you have to go out on a limb to give an opinion, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe a team is coming to you with like an idea and you don't know, you haven't worked directly on it. What you have is a pattern and an intuition and maybe some like behavior that you've seen in the past. And so you kind of have to trust your judgment and your evidence that you have that other people don't have, right? And then you kind of have to make a case based on that. Or for a person, around you or someone on your team is not performing to their potential, like that is at some point on you. Even if you're not
Yeah.
managing them, the success of the team, when you have information that other people should have, that is on you. Like you are holding them back, even by omitting to give them the feedback. And so actually this comes back to the reframe where I think about it as like, how can I give the information I have as a service to others? Whether it's me saying, I don't think this strategy is the correct one, or whether it's me saying, I don't think you're performing at your potential and here's the behaviors that I could imagine changing. Those are things that I need to say, not to be mean or, I don't know, retaliate, like not to be bad in any way, but instead to say, I believe in you. I believe in this team. I believe in what you're trying to do. Let me give you the best possible information I have directly as possible. And while telling you, my intent is to help you be more successful. Let me like make sure I tell you my intent. And then whether you're happy in that moment or not, in the long term, at least you have the information you need to be more successful. And I know I've done everything that I can to help you be more successcul.
Yeah. It's nice that there's a reframing there as well, right? Yeah.
I once worked with a manager who he had so much belief in every person on his team that sometimes they would come with a clearly bad idea. And he'd be, all right, like, you want to try it, go for it. And then later it would fail. And he'd be like, oh man, like, it's too bad they failed. Be like, you could see all these issues. And I was always like, why didn't you just tell them the issues? And he, in my opinion, took the kindness too far. Where he would just say, oh, I thought maybe they would just find a magical way around them. And so that was also helpful for me to see, to say, okay, actually, if that's the reaction I have to that, then that's not going to be the way I act. Like, I have to act in a different way where whether or not people are happy in the short term, I at least know I've done everything I can to help them get all the information that's useful to them.
Yeah. And what kind of comes to my mind is also this whole concept of radical candor, because as much as, it kind of like feels in short term like hurtful or, doesn't come across as the best possible way at that point in time. I think the hindsight is really, it is like the harbinger, which is, it is coming at the time where you at least save some parts of what could happen through. And maybe that's not like very evident at the start, but like you said, withholding that is not going to help anyway. So yeah, it really makes sense to give it through. And I've seen examples of the manager kind of persona that you mentioned as well, where in like I think everybody would love to have someone like that who gives you the space and who gives you all the potential to go execute. But at the same time, I've seen myself, really crave through over time. I remember like a couple of years ago, it's more about, oh my God, I just wish someone was like there around to exactly point this out, because you're also learning. And this is also something I feel that people have this kind of an ego to kind of say, oh no, I'm either like I'm too large to take this from this person, or I know a lot of this to take this. But I feel like what you said is actually coming across at any layer you are. Like you could be the CPO and still like, have this thing from others. So yeah.
I think especially as you get more senior, you need that because fewer people are willing to tell you it, and people can actually see what you're trying to do. And so every piece of constructive feedback is more useful because it means someone went out of their way to try to tell you this thing that felt to them like a hard thing to say and like a big risk, And so then it's more important that you take it seriously.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm with you there. Yeah. Cool. I mean, like, as we wrap this whole the tools concept, something that comes to me on the fly is this whole AI and how it's really shaping up product careers at this point in time, right? As we're speaking, there's like literally vibe coding and so many other things that's happening around. Like, has that, given you some sort of a thought or this change or a pattern in your toolkit in the recent times? Like, is this something that you're reflecting on from a toolkit perspective for you?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a super exciting time and it's also so unpredictable. It's really hard. It's really hard with no fish. I mean, I have two thoughts about this. One thought is something I've carried with me throughout my career, which is one of my teachers in high school who had been around for a long time, who had seen, how automation changed manufacturing jobs, and then I went to Microsoft where the way we built was completely different than, we would press stuff onto we would press it onto CDs, we'd send them to a factory, we'd mail them out, right? And how that changed with cloud services. Yeah. And he said, look, technology is always going to change. You're never going to be secure. You have to stay on the frontier of learning. No matter what, that's the only way to make sure that you'll always have a job. You always have to be learning. So always track what's the frontier and always be learning. And that's something I think about a lot. And I think now more than ever, that's true because so many of the tools that we've built up, the tools that I've built up, probably aren't that useful in the future, And I've invested so much of my time and my career, but that's not the skills that will actually be needed in the future. And so I can't rest on those skills and say, oh, I did all these things in the past and therefore I'm definitely going to be relevant, right? Like,
yeah.
Here. And that's hard because it's tough, especially the more senior you get, I think, but it's tough feeling like you don't know. Like you're trained to tell other people what to do. And so I'm trying to always exercise that feeling of learning, basically.
Yeah.
And one thing that I do is like try to always be doing something outside of work that feels very low stakes that I'm pretty bad at. Whether it's something athletic, like, I don't know, ice skating or a new exercise, something that's so low stakes, but that reminds me of, oh, this is what it feels like to be learning. It doesn't always feel good, but you have these moments of mastery so that I can always just remember, okay, I don't know everything about this new tool, but this is what it feels like. Let me keep learning. And I'm sure I'll just to remember that process because sometimes you can get disconnected. And the other big thing I think about AI is like, I think that there was like a long time where as an anybody in technology, what you would do is fundamentally problem solve for the customer. It didn't matter whether you're in marketing, it didn't matter whether you're in policy, it didn't matter whether you're PM or engineer or design, whatever you were, you would try to think about the problem. And we have luxury in getting more specialized over the past decade plus, where you could say, okay, this is my specialty. This is the piece I'm going to go deep on. And I think what AI really lets us do, what this new round of tools really let us do, is collapse a bunch of those specializations back into what does the customer really want? How can I get it to them? And you can
Mhm.
use all these AI tools to vibe code or vibe design or vibe analyze, like you go back into, okay, I have pretty good tools for all of those. I'm not going to be the best at any of those, but it's really a generalist problem solver, can really rapid like prototype, update, understand what product market fit looks like, get to iteration. And I think that's a real opportunity too for like people who are more generalist to really kind of understand what the next be.
Yeah. No, both the points, I'm completely on board. And as someone who's also in product and seeing this space through, I think the learning part is something that one cannot deny at this point in time, because it's not just like about newer skills. I guess it's a lot rooted with the mindset as well. Like you rightly pointed out, that you've always got to accept the fact that what have been your darling projects are not going to, continue being there for a long time. And that's like totally okay. And I do see how this very mindset has definitely been challenging with folks in product, because there's like a bunch of them who still continue to think, oh, this is not going to come at me. This is not going to change things. And it's a very different worldview. At the same time, there's this exactly the polarizing part where everything is changing and it's like so overwhelming to catch up with all these changes, new tools. And it's just like anytime I think in AI, you feel like, oh my God, I cracked that. The bar is always getting higher, right?
Definitely.
It's never stopping at, oh gosh, you mastered this. So okay, no worries. There's one more, like there's one more. So I
We're
guess it's like,
always behind.
yeah.
Everyone's always behind. Even from this morning, I'm behind. And so I think some of what you have to do is just like get comfortable. I think you have to see, I have to see that. I try to see that as both an opportunity and a cost.
Right.
Like the fact that everything's moving so fast means that, okay, we're all in the same zone. Like
Yeah.
we're all resetting the deck every day. So anytime you choose to dip in, actually you can like learn really, really fast.
Yeah.
It's changing.
Yeah.
Also just be exhausting. Like that same thing about that cognitive load of constantly thinking, I have to be the best, I have to be the best, I have to. And I'm a big fan of just acknowledging imperfection. Like I'm not going to be the absolute best. I'm not going to know every single thing exactly when it comes out. But what I can do is recognize what are the things I'm good at in terms of generalist problem solving, and how do I stay at the front of the pack, not the absolute first, but at the front.
Yeah.
And then how to apply those and just keep on showing up and keep on learning.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally with you there. And one other thing I'd like, add to that, which I'm also seeing in my own learning journey, is really bucketing the different parts of learning, which is there's going to be like 10 parts of AI that keep coming up every year. There's AI agents, there's tools, there's whatever. But I think really reflecting at what really matters to you at this point in time to learn. Is it okay, you're going to learn about agents, or you're going to learn about something, and giving that amount of time into it, right? Just not like jumping from one part to another part too quickly. But if to your point earlier on putting that time and showing up, I think that's more so important with AI learning as well, where you try to really see what's really the thing for you to look at this point in time, and then give it all your effort and time and energy into spending into that.
That makes sense. Yeah. Same as don't switch contexts too quickly. Like
Exactly.
really try to go like get something to a point where you understand the bones.
Yeah.
And rely on that framework.
Totally. And this also reminds me of what you, I think, often keep saying about this fact of being right was being curious, right? So, especially with AI and what we're talking about right now, a lot of this sounds like what really matters right now is to be curious rather than say, oh, I have this opinion, or this is the right thing to do. And because nobody at this point in time have cracked what is right and what's wrong about where the market is going. Oh, to what worked as a context for being right versus being curious, I absolutely see it happening at what we're facing with AI right now. Is the only answer to all of this is to be curious.
It's very liberating. I think it's hard. It's hard for a lot of us to let go of always being right, because that has been, at least for me, it's been my identity, and it's also been my job, at different points in my career. And that's one of the biggest hurdles I've had to get through for myself, is constantly feeling a pressure to be right. And I can see it, I have 3 little kids, so I can even see it in them. One of them is going through a phase where he just doesn't want to be wrong, and when he's wrong about stuff, he'll think of a way that he was actually right. He'll try to be like, oh, but if you think about it, that's then I was right. And so I think it's like a human nature thing to want to be right, but it's less useful in a world where you constantly have to learn, because it's hard to learn when you already believe you're right. And so, especially in this world where everything's changing, like you have to know that you're wrong a lot of the time. Otherwise, you have no motivation to to do anything different or to learn anything different. And I do feel like that's one of the hardest hurdles to get over, is
Yeah.
that whole physical and emotional feeling of just being wrong.
No.
Of being embarrassed, of not looking competent in front of people you care about. Like, and then I think that's part of the exercise, is just being
Yeah.
that in safe forums and then in less safe forums, and just like getting used and closing the loop. I do think there's a bunch of tactics around it where you can say to people, hey, I'm trying to learn this stuff. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. It'll sometimes sound stupid. Help me out when I'm doing them. And then I will tell you what I'm learning. There's like different ways to do this so that you can enlist other people around you into that struggle with you, so they don't judge you and they instead help you. But I always think the first battle is with yourself,
Yeah.
you feeling that way and
Yeah.
deciding you're going to overcome it.
Yeah. It sounds like how a lot of these challenges that we navigate in product and building businesses at the same time comes down to dealing with a lot of emotions. But when it comes to the emotional part, I think that's where we struggle the most at. And like we're great at putting OKRs and metrics and saying when to stop something, when to pull the plug into whatever we're running as experiments. But if the same thing is actually happening with our own emotions and whatever, like being that empathetic person showing up for others, I think that's where the whole mindset challenge appears, right?
And all that is just my bias too, is that I think
Yeah.
emotions are hard, and I think rational frameworks are usually easier.
Okay.
And I also think that like maybe the industry attracts people who feel that way, and that's why we're attracted to like a place where you focus on rational things, what helps you get ahead, and then you
Yeah.
can kind of bury yourself in thinking about that.
Yeah.
But I don't know, my life is so much happier and better and easier when I can have some of that same resilience and liberty to try things in my personal life too. And
Yeah.
so the more I just pull over some of those tools and feelings, like I found that to be really complimentary.
Yeah. No, I can totally understand and stitch that through the narratives that we're talking about. And also, I think this innately gives rise to the fact that you tend to be very hands-on also, right? Because when you're naturally curious and when you just want to go about applying this both in personal and professional lives, I think the this whole aspect of, yeah, let's just go do this. Let's just like instead of just sitting and then there's this constant overthinking about should we not do? There's this straight to get something done. And like I think from your experiences, I've seen you do the same thing. I've seen you how you've quoted about being that note taker on most of the meetings early on. I've personally seen that in the women in product community as well. When I've like volunteered and I've seen you literally done stuff there, run all of these meetups and conferences and speak to people. So there's so many hands-on roles that come as a part of just focusing on execution. And I think more so now with a lot of what we're talking about in terms of being curious, I think being hands-on is also like a very trait that goes hand in hand, I believe. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I always say that execution eats strategy for breakfast. You can sit and talk about all sorts of things, but the future belongs to the people who do things. Always. That's true in products. I think that's true in the world.
Yes.
And so some of it is just getting over that activation energy of whatever it is. Like maybe I think for some of us, it's like, oh, this isn't perfect enough. If I do it, I won't have time to do it perfectly, or I'm not ready to ship it because it's not all the way done. And a lot of it for me has just been coming to terms with like, I'm just going to hit go anyway,
Yeah.
But I set myself time, I write stuff. So I set myself time limits. I'm going to spend X amount of time on writing. I'm going to spend no more than 5 minutes on the drawing. That's it. Otherwise, it can suck up so much more time.
Yeah.
It probably wouldn't be worth it, actually, even for my readers, if I spent that more time. And so just getting used to like doing stuff and doing enough of it helped me just reduce the pressure to always know you're going to get another chance. So that may or may not be true, but that's like what I have in my framing. It's fine. Like, I don't know, we're doing this conversation. even if it doesn't go as perfectly, probably in a couple of years, someone else will ask me to talk. That's fine. I'll get another shot. No matter what, you get a shot, you get another shot, you get another shot. And that to me helps reduce the pressure to be
Nice.
totally perfect the first time you do everything, or even the
Yeah.
second. And instead just focus on like, get it done, get it done, get it done, because that's how you get better.
Yeah. And I think you naturally start getting better, right? Like when you less focus, when you less obsess on, oh my God, like, is this like that perfect version that's going out? I think naturally when you start less obsessing, I guess you tend to, you tend to be more of yourself, and naturally you tend to get better. Yeah.
More reps. Yeah, like it's that story of like the pottery class. I don't know if this is real research or the story. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the two groups, one that was going to be like graded on how good their best pot was, and one that was just graded on sheer volume of pots.
Yep.
And the best
Yep.
pots all came from the sheer volume, just because
Volume. Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
put that
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah. No,
I think that's
totally.
important.
Yeah, I think there's versions of the story that's like, been through. I've read a very similar one in terms of the best photograph, where like two groups of photographers were asked to go take a photo of what they see, and the pressure was on one group where you have to take your best photo ever, and then there's like just shoot what you see, and then I think the second group obviously like tends to get more like, because I think there's also like very subtle nuances of that. You start noticing more things about yourself, and to your point about being more aware of what energizes you, what doesn't. I think all of that comes from just being able to increase that surface area and just being able to show up more often than not, and then figure it out as to how it works for you.
Yeah, I think more reps just helps with everything.
Absolutely. As we come to the last part of the chat, which, I like, this is like too quick, and I see us discussing a lot of things. I'd love to get your take on, I've read in one of the articles, like how you compare your career to small plates dinner. I think it's so cute. Like, I love this phrasing, and it's just like a bit of everything in tech that, and to whatever, the honor part of it also, right? You've done that multiple roles across in tech. So for you, particularly this phase after being the CPO of Faire, how's it been for you, Ami, in the recent times? What's been on your mind lately? What's happening? I'd love to, get more takes on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing on my mind in terms of where the industry is going is that I do think it's harder to be specialized. And skill sets that will be valued in the industry will continue to change. I mean, I think ICs will be I think being a senior IC is like a great position, because you want people who can just get stuff done and execute. You want people who can iterate fast, who can like have ownership, understand the customer. And so what I think about is how do I help that how do I use that framework of all these little different things to make something really interesting? What does that look like for me in particular? If that's like the pattern that I have, if that's what I get energy from, how do I apply it in this world? And I don't know. I'm still thinking about that, but it's really fun to just be part of like seeing what's happening and watching what other people are doing in this like wave that's totally changing stuff every day. It's a pretty exciting time.
Yeah, best time to learn, best time to be curious. I think it's like a perfect time to embody everything that we spoke about in the chat. Like, be open, be curious. So it's just like, it sounds like the perfect time to be in. And yeah, this also sounds great. I mean, I know, like, for being that fangirl and seeing a lot of your experiences over time, I really root for you and really see this all coming together as to how you can get that thing that you want to be in, the place that you want to be in.
Thank you. You're so kind. This has been so fun. Thank you so much for a great conversation.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much. This has been fun. And for the listeners too, I think we did discuss like a lot of anecdotes, more practical stories, and ways that I think they can also like deal with what's happening around. Because I do know, like, for a lot of product people who've been like thinking about AI, who've been thinking about how to get the other aspects of their mindset built to deal with what's coming up for them in careers, right? So I'm so glad we spoke what we spoke on the show today. Thank you so much for making this happen. And yeah, I'm looking forward to staying connected.
Me too. All right. All the best.
Awesome. Thank you.